The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mind.
Mike, the Unlikely Innovators are back, and we're back in a big way. This week we have Stuart Reynolds, better known as Brittlestar, on the podcast. I thought it was an awesome episode. Great to talk to Stuart. Very enlightening on all things viral videos.
I thought it was great. I wish that we had recorded as soon as the Zoom call started, because what I'll share with the listeners is that Stuart was testing his microphone by singing. And I just thought of how you used to always sing your way into a podcast intro. And I thought, if there was any week for Steve to bring back the singing intro, it would have been this week. But I know that's a lot of pressure to follow Stuart because he has a great voice. And again, as we saw in the background, nice display of guitars, and he certainly walked us through his initial dreams, I think, of being a musician as a youngster to transitioning into his career now, making videos and producing content.
So, Mike, I can't just sing for any guest. There has to be something that strikes me in the episode that is relatable, and unfortunately, I just didn't. It didn't rhyme with anything. I didn't find any particular song that would match. So it'll come back. I'll tease the audience. I don't know when it'll come back, but it will come back.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think we should put a hard deadline on it, or even a goalpost. I think, to your point, I agree. It has to hit you at the right moment.
It has to be organic, and it has to be genuine. As Stuart mentioned, it's important that content appears genuine, and it wouldn't be genuine for me to shoehorn content in like that. Now, what I want to say is we're going to quickly get out of the way because we packed a lot into this interview. And I really hope everyone enjoys this as much as we did making it. Here is Stuart Reynolds, Brittlestar.
We're back, and we're pleased to be joined by Stuart Reynolds, but you probably know him better as Brittlestar. His comedic and family-friendly videos have been seen more than 600 million times on various platforms. His KFC video campaign was the most popular branded video content in the world on Facebook for the summer of 2017. With a global fan base, an invitation to the White House, speaking engagements all over North America, commentary segments on Global National, a panelist on CTV National News, starring in the DreamWorks TV show Kid vs. Parent with his youngest son, collaborations with celebs such as Ryan Reynolds, Gordon Ramsay, and the Property Brothers, and meet and greets at Playlist Live. Brittlestar is living the social media celebrity dream. Not bad for a dad from the suburbs, and not bad for a guest on the Unlikely Innovators. So, Brittlestar, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Gosh, I love hearing that introduction.
It is a great intro, a great bio.
It makes you feel like I've really done some things, which is nice. There's so many times when I think to myself, I don't feel like I've done anything, and I just have to go back and have someone read my bio. I could just pay someone to read my bio every morning. That'd be good.
Yeah, I think every day you get out of the bed in the morning, right, to have your bio at the ready,
Yeah.
It's like a reverse daily affirmation,
Yeah, exactly. When I'll just, as a really quick aside here, I remember I was filming in Vancouver, and I was staying at a friend's house, and his mother-in-law came over, and right before it was him and I were working on this thing called Hotel Bellicombe, and right before we left to go to set that day, she gave him and I like these big hugs, and I didn't really know her at all. I was like, I felt great after I got outside into the car, and I was like, God, I want to start every day like that. If I could just get her to read my bio and hug me, that'd be perfect.
Yeah. I wish I get a hug every time. Sometimes my wife isn't up when I leave in the morning. I leave a bit early sometimes. And if she read my bio, it would actually probably be way worse than if someone read it professionally.
Well, Tanya, if you're listening to this, we need a bio and a hug every morning for Steve. So
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
We'll get her on that, Steve. But Stuart, obviously before we get to, the Brittlestar persona, we always like to ask our guests about their career path. And sometimes, we have these guests on, and the show is called The Unlikely Innovators. And in our minds, we think that a lot of our guests have unlikely career paths. But then as they kind of explain to us their journey, it's often not so unlikely. But before you got to, releasing and posting your own videos in 2013, can you maybe talk about your career path and where you were going and what you thought you would do versus where you ended up now?
Sure, yeah. I mean, growing up, I was really involved in music, and I was that was my main focus, was like, I'm going to be a musician of some sort. And I wasn't even a musician. I think I just wanted to be a pop star. That was basically it. I wasn't even focused on the actual skill part of the music. I was like, that sounds super fun. I'd like to do that. And so I really, really focused on that for a very long time until I was about when I was 19. I started writing radio jingles as a way to make money making music, and did that for about 5 years. And and it ran a little successful little business, which was great. And then after that, I moved to the UK, and it was kind of like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do now. It was sort of, it was sort of different times. I was in my mid-20s, and I decided at the end of my 20s, my wife and I were like, well, let's start our own business. And so we started a business that was kind of essentially like a web development type business, did hosting and all that kind of stuff. And we did that as a sort of way for us to stay home with the kids, so that we were able to, like, when we were planning on having children, it's like, this is a good way for us to set our own hours. So we did that for 10 years. And we had this company that we ran in a couple of different offices around town. And then eventually ran it in our house. We moved out to the suburbs. We had more space. And but right before, and then we actually sort of moved it back to downtown. And then we were hacked. And we were hacked by a 16-year-old in Cairo. And I knew tremendous amounts of information about this young man. He was 16. I knew his home address. I knew everything. I was able to pinpoint a ton of information about this kid. And he just basically had vandalized the front doors, essentially, of everyone's website. But the downside is, of course, when you vandalize the front door of a website, that means people can't get into the business at all. So they don't just have to look past, some sort of phallic graffiti. But that sort of wiped us out for about 2 days. And in that 2 days, we lost about 65% of our clientele. They all left us. And wow. And then it was about 3 months after that we lost a huge contract in the States just because they changed owners. They were happy with us. We love you guys. The new owners just don't want you. And we lost a huge amount of money. So we went down to like sort of serious fiscal straits. It was really, really dire for us from about 2008 until 2013. I dabbled a bit in voiceovers. I had the studio set up in my house, which if you can see me right now, it's basically where I am. But I would do voiceovers, and that sort of got us through and made some mortgage payments. And then the social media kind of really hit, especially Vine. And I realized there was an opportunity to kind of go into that kind of stuff. So it's been, I didn't plan to be where I am at all. There was no way I could have planned it. Like how I can't imagine going back to my 16-year-old self and saying, in the future, when you're in your early 40s, you will start making movies with your phone. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I was, when I heard that you had lived in the UK around the right time, I was going to ask you a question, but it's often not good to ask a question that you don't know the answer to.
Those are the best kind.
Well, I'll ask it anyways then. I was going to say, if you're living in the UK, did you ever listen to the Ricky Gervais show when it was on XFM?
That was after my time in the UK.
Oh,
That's how old I am. Yeah, I was there in 95, 96. And
Okay.
Ricky was just still a failed pop star at that point. So
Yeah, which is honestly the best version of Ricky Gervais in a lot of ways. But no, I've been re-listening. They have it on Spotify, and I just would have loved to have recognized that as a radio show at the time. But I'm coming to it way late now.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like Carl Pilkington is hilarious. It's
huge fan
it's
of
so
Carl
good.
Pilkington.
Yeah,
yeah, and that sort of British sensibility that they can only convey is so good. I'm going to nerd out for a second with you if I can.
Sure.
I'm sure you're familiar with Marshall McLuhan saying that the medium is the message. When you started releasing videos on Vine, which no longer exists, then you sort of switched to TikTok and Instagram. Can you just talk a bit about how, the medium of like media-rich social media sharing has influenced your evolution on what you release on social media?
Oh yeah, even from the get-go, like the reason that Vine was a success was because of the advent of 4G, and it meant that you were able to download and view videos on your phone while you're standing in line at the grocery store, which just really hadn't been a possibility prior to that. Never mind the fact that you could make videos on your phone and upload them pretty easily too. So that was a massive player in what we were doing. And of course, starting back in those days, Vines were 480 pixels by 480. So it was pretty low resolution. And then as things sort of progressed and we sort of got into LTE and all that kind of stuff, it was like, okay, well, people want better quality. They want better quality. So you have to now upgrade it to 720 at least, if not 1080. And they're going to see more. It's a bit like I watch Coronation Street. Don't make fun of me.
I love it.
I watch Coronation Street, and when HD television kicked in, they had to redo all of their sets because people were like, "I can see that that is a fake whatever in the background, so you need to fix that." So I mean, that kind of thing is like technology has a massive impact in what I'm doing in the sense that the production quality had to increase with it as well. And it just kind of, I mean, it made it easier to do everything, which is also, I mean, it made it harder in the sense that you had to be more aware of what was happening in the frame because people can see detail and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, it made it easier for me to start doing more and more videos. Like people just wanted more content.
What about creatively, like the length of the videos? You don't get to have Mike and I have the benefit of spending a half hour with people to
Mm.
convey a message. Having 30 seconds to 2 minutes, that's pretty much the old time commercial spot, right? You know,
Exactly.
so what is that like creatively, having to pack that in?
I'm a fan of it actually, which is, what's interesting is I signed a book deal at the beginning of summer. And so I've been writing this book, which is like a collection of essays. And I was pretty explicit with the publisher and the agency. And I was like, I don't want to like pad this. I want to get to the point right away. And I think there's just so much media, there's so much content for people to consume that I feel sometimes you've got to really have a good reason to eat up a lot of their time.
Mhm.
And there's a place for that. Like there's my wife and I, Shannon and I, love documentaries. We will spend hours watching documentaries, want to deep dive on stuff like that. But in the social media world, in sort of the passing entertainment media world, there's so many things competing for people's attention, and people are under this sort of notion that the next best thing is the next scroll away. Like, what are they
Mhm.
missing by watching you? What are they missing next, or what are they going to be late to the game with? So I'm a fan of that 30 to 60 seconds. I did a video actually today, which isn't out yet, which I was watching my audio recorder clock as I was doing it to sort of give me an idea of roughly how long it was. It came in at about 1 minute 20 seconds. I was like, oh yeah, that's the sweet spot. That's a novel in my world, so that's great.
It's funny too because I remember when Twitter had switched from 140 characters to 280.
Hmm.
I lamented the change because I had felt that I had gotten so, and I mean good in air quotes, but like I thought I had perfected getting my tweets down to 140
Yeah,
characters, and now it threw off like how I put these together. It was going to change everything. It was going to be too long, and then obviously we know that it worked out fine. But in that moment, I was probably one of the few, I guess, hipster Twitter users who were like, no, we need to keep it at
yeah, I
140
was the same.
characters.
Yeah, I was the same. I enjoyed it. I liked that telegraphic quality that it had. It was
Yeah.
sort of like, heading to store. It rained. Much
Yeah.
wetness or something, really sort of quick. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for being succinct and for being and cutting to the chase and kind of and leading to the next, starting a conversation as opposed to, in people's minds at least, as opposed to leading, putting out too much information at one time.
Mhm. Absolutely. And just kind of switching gears to some of your other videos. I know that in the bio that I read, we referenced, the KFC video that obviously the campaign that went viral. So we
Hmm.
wanted to ask you that a lot of corporate advertising firms have tried to, engineer their own viral videos, trying to
Hmm.
blend social media content with, their own branding and advertising. But you've done a really remarkable job at, I think, doing that and being able to take social media satire, but also kind of give it the quality that I think a lot of these firms are looking for. How have you been able to find that winning formula? And is there any tricks you've learned along the way that have allowed you to do it in the way that you have?
I think that the medium itself, like social media as a medium, is based on personality and a sense of authenticity to it. So if you try to do something that's too broadcast and too TV, it looks really fake and it looks like you're trying to pull one over on the viewer. And I think that you know, there's a in that earnestness, there's a way you can kind of approach branded content and be like, this is a branded piece of content. Like,
Mhm.
we all know ads exist and we all know I gots to eat. So this is what we're doing now. Um, I mean, I think that the more you try to pretend like something isn't an ad, the more you try to sucker people in, the less effective it is, and the less likely they are to share it. Plus, I think that's one of the most important things for anything that wants to go viral. And for those who are just listening, I'm air quoting. But for those people who are trying to create something that goes viral, it has to have utility. It has to have functionality. It has to be a piece of content that people can use to express who they are or how they feel about something. If it doesn't have any, even if it's a case of like, this is going to make you smile, that can be a purpose or utility. It just has to have something. It can't be like, there's a sale on pianos at Johnny's Piano Shack. Like, who cares? Who cares about that? But if you tie that into that special moment when we gathered around the piano and Granny played such and such, and man, I love the fact that she knew how to play Sweet Child of Mine on the piano. That was great. That's a funny story, and it's kind of like, okay, and that maybe resonates more than just like, hey, come buy our pianos. I don't know why I chose pianos for that example, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah, it sounds like a great campaign, actually. But and I think you're quite right. I always find myself, like I'm a kind of a lurker on TikTok. I don't usually produce that much content, but I always realize, these trends that come up, like they're either dances or voiceovers. It always rings so hollow when a corporate tries to like
Sure.
recreate that and jump in because they've already missed it if they're doing it, right? If they've heard about
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
they've already missed it. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I think it can be really hollow, and I think it can because it looks like, again, like you're trying to con people. It looks like you're trying to trick people, and that just doesn't work that well. I mean, sometimes it does, but it rarely does. I much prefer, like, if you look at the Washington Post as a good example of TikTok content, even if they're doing something that's trending on TikTok, they will do it in a manner that makes it obvious that they are a brand trying to do something that's trending, and it's ridiculous, and that's the funny part of it.
Yeah.
There's just this weird level, I think, because of the intimacy of the medium, because people are usually watching on their phones, which means they're holding your entire being, in their hand while they're on the toilet, or while they're in bed, or while they're on the couch, or while they're on the bus trying to ignore everybody else. And that's a very, very intimate connection between you and the person on screen. And it becomes that sort of parasocial relationship. And it's really interesting. We were talking about this recently when I was at an event, and people were saying how odd it is when you meet people in real life that you've watched on screen only, but not just your phone. When you see people on television and you see them in real life, it's like, oh wow, they're a celebrity, and it's exciting. When you see people from social media, you see them and you go, hey, remember that time I did this? And you're like, oh yeah, that's right. We don't actually know each other. There's like a weird different level,
Yeah, it's true. It's as if they sent you a text or through WhatsApp a video of theirs,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
that
exactly.
intimate. Yeah. Um, I think we've asked a few of our guests before. I remember asking Terry O'Reilly, who's actually an interesting parallel to the
Mm-hmm.
kind of work you do in a more traditional sense. Just, when did you know you made it? And I think to a degree, Terry was kind of like he's always looking at the next job anyways, even though,
Right.
someone as secure as that. Do you feel sort of the same that, you kind of don't really have time to say, I've made it? I mean, you've obviously had some significant stardom, for lack of a better word, with the things that you do. When was there a point where you knew like, holy shit, this is actually more than just, my local community that might care about this?
I mean, I've always had a grasp that doing anything on the internet, if you succeeded on it, you were not necessarily known for it in your local community. Like even doing music back in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, like 2007, 8, whatever, I had success in music, but nobody really in town knew who the hell I was or what I was doing. Um, and in the same way for now doing videos, it's like if someone recognizes me at Sobeys, it's like, well, that's nice. It's rare though as well. Um, uh, but I think that I don't have that notion of like I've made it, because I think that's part of being self-employed. As I think as Jonathan Torrens once said to me, he said, there's as a freelancer, as someone who's self-employed, you have two modes: work and worry. That's it. And that's basically sort of how I operate, which I try not to. I'm really trying not to do that. But you, in the same way that Terry said, you're just looking for your next gig, you're looking for your next piece of work. That's kind of where I'm at, where I sort of like I do something, I go, well, that's really great. What next? And I do that because one of the things that's specific to social media is that it's a nonstop demand for content and a nonstop competition for profile. So if I stop posting for a couple months, I have to work to get those people back.
Yeah.
And that's not probably the healthiest thing in the world. And there's ways to get around that. You can do, rerun content and all that kind of stuff, which is a good way to get around it when you need those time off or you can't do it or whatever. But it's nonstop and constant. That said, I will say that when I got invited to the White House, that was one of the things that made me go, okay, all right, I think I'm punching above my weight here now. This feels like I've done something outside of my front yard now. I'm hitting, I'm impacting a wider audience than I thought, which was really cool.
Imagine being on the guest list for the White House, but then not being let in a bar in your local town, right? That's the, like, to your point about not being known locally, right? That's got to be a weird dichotomy.
It is. Well, luckily enough, I spend a lot of money in bars, so they let me in any bar, so it's fun.
Fair enough.
I was gonna say I had a moment, and I don't have very many viral tweets, but I do kind of dabble in hockey tweets. So occasionally one will pick up some steam. And I remember a few years ago, I had a tweet about, Ariana Grande once, drove the Florida Panthers Zamboni because she got hit by a puck at a game and her parents, won the auction for her to have a ride on the Zamboni.
Yeah.
It was leading up to the Grammys that year where she was up for a bunch of awards, and it went viral for me. And it was being aggregated in all these other news sites, and my local radio station actually called me because they wanted to talk to me on the air about this tweet. And I just thought it was such a surreal moment that I'm on the local radio talking about a tweet about Ariana Grande. And again, the majority of the people in my community wouldn't know that I exist, let alone that I was tweeting about Ariana Grande, right? So
yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, I think that because you can impact so many people, like, for such distances, like around the world, and I think it being recognized for me is like one of the weird things, because I remember when we were in Times Square, myself and my family, we were there doing stuff with the Property Brothers, and we were crossing Times Square, and someone said, "Oh my God, it's Brittlestar and his family too." And it's like, that's weird. Okay, cool. This is cool. So I mean, it's really, and then at the exact same time, I mean, I could, there's places where I'll go where it's like, no one has any idea what I do, and even when I tell them what I do, they're like, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Did they think the Property Brothers were your adopted sons when they said that?
Exactly. What? That guy looks great for his age. Man, they really got the best of the genes, whoever they got them from.
I wanted to ask you this, and again, Steve's a huge Norm Macdonald fan, so he's probably gonna be mad at me for taking this question from him. But Norm always used to joke when he was interviewing people, at the end, he'd be like, "Where do you get your ideas from?" And obviously, I don't want to ask you that, because I mean that's it's a
deliberately silly question.
Yeah,
right?
no one, there's not a place where you could say. But I mean, the one thing we did want to ask you is that obviously, the need to kind of keep fresh and keep producing content. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what your creative process is like, and how you go about it so that you keep staying fresh and up to date with the things that you need to do?
Well, that was a very fancy way of saying, where do you get your ideas from?
Well, exactly.
You can answer it as ridiculously as some of his guests did.
You never heard of the Revolution, Mike? No, you never heard. Sorry, it was a reference to Norm Macdonald podcast.
Yeah.
But no, I think that one of the things I learned, because I was never really involved in comedy, I sort of considered myself kind of funny when I go out. At least after a couple of drinks, I was pretty funny. And I could tell a story because it was kind of ingrained in my upbringing of the Scottish family. Is kind of like, you got to tell a good story. And I think one of the places I get my ideas from, as it were, would be to think about what's funny to me, and then from there go, wait, is it funny to just me? Or is it funny to everybody else too? And then at the same time, you just kind of got to go for it. I mean, that's one of the great things about creating content now, is that I was a big fan of SCTV growing up, and I get to basically run SCTV, my own SCTV in my house. So, and it doesn't cost me really anything more if I do 10 videos a week, or if I do 1 video a week, it's the same price. So I can throw ideas at the wall. I can do stuff and be like, this might be funny. I don't know. I think it is. But there is that sort of pre-filter that goes through my head of like, what's a funny situation, or what's something that I can comment on, and how can I provide value to that conversation, and how can I not be, too trite about it. Like that's always a big consideration. Is I don't want to punch down, and I also don't want to mock something or make light of something that is more of a serious matter that are like people would be thinking. If I was someone else, I'd be looking at my content going, just shut up. You don't need to comment on this. So those are the filters I have to go through in my head, and then after that, it's kind of like, I don't know. Let's just see if this works. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, it's like when comedians try their stuff out at very small clubs first.
Oh yeah.
Your club is your head first,
Yes.
and then if it passes that gate,
Yeah.
then maybe it'll make it online.
Yeah,
Well-
I think so. Sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Finish your
I was
thought.
just gonna say that. Yeah, I mean, I have friends who are stand-ups, and I've done a couple of events where they've essentially said, "Hey, can you just entertain us for 20 minutes?" I'm like, I am not a stand-up comedian, but I will try, I guess. And it's I think doing it on the internet is much easier, even though you're opening yourself up to abuse from all over the world. You just, who cares? Those guys are just losers on the internet like me.
Well, so one of the things I wanted to follow up with was because I do some writing on the side, so obviously it's not like producing and creating videos, but it's still the creative process that goes into that. And I think when I first started to do writing a little more seriously, I always thought that writing only took place like when I was in front of my computer on my keyboard. But the more that I've done it, the more I've realized that you're writing all the time. Like when I'm doing dishes, like the ideas are flowing, and then when I actually sit down on the computer, I already have something to kind of go with. Or if I'm out for a walk with my kids, an idea might spring up, and then you're writing in your head, and then when you sit down, it kind of comes out. Do you have that same kind of process when it comes to the videos, or are they coming from anywhere, and then you just kind of sit down and stream it?
Yeah, I'm trying to be more regimented about what I'm doing now. This is new, and this is basically because of the book thing. Because I need to write every day for the book if I want to make my deadline now. We're into that crunch period now. We've gone through the summer of, it doesn't matter. I'll get it done by then. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And now it's like, crap. I have to actually get this done. So I'm trying to be more regimented about what I'm doing. But I think even saying that, like this morning, I just woke up, and while I was having my breakfast, I was like, oh, this would be a good idea. And then I read someone's tweet online. I was like, oh, okay, they talk about it too. Okay, good. All right. Or this is an issue that's out there. And then I wrote the script, and the script was kind of written this morning. And then I thought, well, I have to go actually write for the book. And then once I'm done writing for the book, I'll film this video, which I did. It's really hard though, because there's nothing worse than kind of like sitting down in front of your computer and being like, right, do something funny. And it's like, I don't know. And you do get, just much the same to you as you, and I'm sure a lot of people, I get much more inspired when I'm doing menial tasks or out walking or in the shower or, like I said, like menial tasks, like mowing the lawn, great spot. Mow the lawn, you get nice and vibrated. It's good. And you're like, the brain's going. Or if I go on the treadmill, like those are also places where my mind kind of goes around and kind of opens up a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, that'd be a good idea. And I think you kind of have to have those seeds before you sit down to work, because if you don't, you're just going to be, it's like, well, I don't want to draw an explicit picture, but it's basically constipation is what it is. And it's just no good. You just got to wait for it to come out.
Yeah.
I think, I think what you're doing is very, somewhat singular and unique, when you look at everything that's out there on social media. A couple comparisons, if I may, to folks that I've seen in the past. Obviously,
this is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I hope so. Gosh, I hope so.
A lot of pressure, Steve.
Well, so obviously, Rick Mercer's rants and his skits sort of come to mind, especially the political, topical stuff that you do. And then obviously, I don't know if you know this person, but there's a guy from the UK named Jonathan Pye who does sort of a fake news sort of skewing. And I find that there's a bit of what you're doing in some of that sort of those two forms. Do you take influence from folks like that? Rick Mercer, maybe less so Jonathan Pye?
Rick Mercer for sure. Absolutely. There is no one in this country more glad that Rick Mercer is not doing rants weekly than I am. And I remember actually at the time sort of like, especially kicking into, I guess it was largely based on the U.S. political situation 2016 on. And then Rick was giving up the Mercer report, and it was like, okay, I wish he had made a video about this right now. And if he's not making one, I'll make one, I guess. And I remember trying that a couple of times and doing like the walk and talk like he does. First of all, That's hard.
No
Walking
shit.
and talking is hard. You're like, am I jogging? And then you look back and you're like, no, I'm like walking at a snail's pace, but I'm like out of breath already. That's not good. So it's really difficult to do the physical part of that, but also Rick is like tremendously smarter than I am and much more involved and in the details of the things that he talks about. Whereas I try to sort of see it from like either a top down or an everyman perspective of like, I only have so much time to get into this, and I'm just going to just cover the top sort of how I feel about something or what I think the general gist of something is. If you want the details, you're going to have to go somewhere else and get the details because I can't provide all that information, at least not, and do it funny at the same time. Plus, also, I try not to get angry. Like Jonathan Pye is fantastic, but I also try not to get angry because I feel I'm already telegenically challenged in that regard. So it's like I find if I smile and I look happy too much, no, that's not very attractive. And if I look angry, same deal. It's just all bared teeth. Nothing with bared teeth looks good for me. So I think I have to I found that kind of middle ground where it's very deadpan and very sort of, straight ahead and yeah, I mean, I appreciate you making those two references. I'm a fan of both of those guys for sure. Jonathan Pye is hilarious. I love his pieces for the New Yorker is just so good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I try not to be angry, and I'm not as smart. That's my difference. That's my niche. Dumber and slightly happier.
Well, you're quite right about like there was almost something professorial about we all sort of gathered around and heard the rant from Rick Mercer each week. So being the everyman is the move, right? Like that seems to be a good spot for sure. And then obviously Jonathan Pye is sort of skewering the most sort of top down possible, like
Yeah.
the newsman, right? So
Yeah, I think that Jonathan Pye does a great job of giving the emotional reaction to things like, are you seeing this? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? And I think that Rick Mercer's, his rants were great because exactly that. And I had people commenting on the videos. I started kind of doing these sort of monologue type videos. They'd be saying, I'm so glad that you said this because we needed to like someone to explain how we're feeling about this. And I think there's a real need. I think when you think back to those Mercer rants, there was like, exactly as you said, you would have that weekly thing of somebody who was also Canadian talking about a Canadian thing going, okay, this is what happened. And yeah, you're right. This means this, or this does suck or whatever. And that was really, really therapeutic for people. So, I mean, that's that utility and function again with social media content posting where you kind of have to provide value because you're asking a tremendous amount for people to not scroll to the next thing. Like, because it could be the most amazing video right after yours and you're wasting their time.
So Stuart, to switch gears a bit, I'm a father of two girls, and so I'd be remiss, if I didn't ask the internet's favorite dad a question about parenting. So I wanted to ask you, for all the listeners and viewers out there, what would be the best piece of dad or parenting advice, that you could share, over your years of being a father and a parent?
Wow, just in general?
Sure, however you want to take it.
I say, in general, listen. Listen to your kids, and keep that dialogue open. Yeah, I think it's, I used to watch Three's Company, the TV show growing up, and it dawned on me, even back then, I was like, you know what? I think every episode's based on miscommunication. Because this is a bigger issue than we think it is. And then, of course, if you watch Coronation Street now, you'll find it's much the same. Someone leaves their phone at home and something tragic happens. And then, it's miscommunication. No one knows what's going on. It's a communication issue. So I think it's cliched, and I think it's maybe, oversaid sometimes, but it's so true. I think if you can maintain any dialogue with your kids, you should do it. You should be as open as possible. One of the things the pandemic did for us as a family, my kids are essentially grown now. They're 20 and 23. But of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, they were, 18 and 21. One of the things, which is really funny, is that we've never been really strict about profanity in our house. Like, it's kind of like if it happens, it happens. It doesn't really matter. You try not to because you want to. I mean, I've always I've grown up with the notion that you should be able to find a better word to more accurately describe what you're feeling than just the F-bomb. But sometimes the F-bomb is like the perfect word. That is like, it's onomatopoeic, it's everything. And that's why it's existed for so long. And we kind of just dropped all of the profanity concerns whatsoever as we went into the pandemic. And it freed us up to have conversations we would have never had before. And they were a little startling, and they were a little bit, whatever. But man, it made a massive difference in the sense that both of our kids have said to us, I'm so glad we can talk about this. It's like, man, I'm really glad we can talk about this too. Because I can't imagine if you weren't talking. Like, I think back to when I was growing up. I was like, what did I do? I just didn't talk about this stuff with my folks, and look how I turned out. So we want them to be better than that.
No, that's great advice. I mean, I think of it's funny too, because in my house growing up, my parents were they did get pretty strict about the F-bombs as we got a little bit older. I think they tolerated it a little bit, but I remember one summer I was working at a smelter. So, manual labor, there was a lot of, unsavory language being thrown around at the site.
Yeah.
And I remember it just like, we didn't even realize it though, but we called it smelter mouth because we were all around the table, just like F-bombs to pass the carrots and stuff. And like, at that point we were much older. So I think they thought it was funny. I just remember we were all laughing about it, that we just kind of, even though I was the one working at the smelter mouth kind of invaded the table.
It's contagious.
And
yeah, it's contagious. It just feels good for some reason. I don't know why.
A pandemic of another kind, perhaps.
Yeah.
I definitely resemble that too, Mike. I grew up around loggers, essentially. My parents owned a logging company, and it was sort of just a fixture. The F-bomb was just everywhere, and a lot of French swears. They employed half their workforces were from Quebec also. So you got both official languages. So
yeah, I think it's just important to get the communication aspect. The communication outweighs everything else. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a lot of misunderstandings. Yeah, like because my daughters are 6 and 2, and so we have a communication problem in the sense that like the youngest one can't always communicate what is the issue, right? But you just have to like put a little extra effort to try to get her to repeat it, and eventually you might arrive at what the problem is and then kind of address it. But yeah, I feel like as they get older that'll be easier, but it's at those early ages where there's a communication barrier just by virtue of the fact that they can't express their thoughts just yet. But yeah,
for sure.
It goes a long way.
As an aside, there's a fantastic series. The guy whose mom gave me a hug, or his mother-in-law gave me a hug, is named Matt Clark, and him and David Milchard did a number of seasons of a show called Convos with My 2-year-old. And if for anyone who has kids, man, it is exactly what you're saying. It's that he literally he transcribed conversations he would have with his 2-year-old daughter, and then he'd have that script acted out by him and his friend David, like a fully grown man who would be
awesome.
his daughter. And it's absolutely hilarious. And especially as a parent, you're like, this is exactly that communication thing where it's like they're trying to say something, and it's that weird thing I find with parenting as well, is that I think your parents are the first people that treat you as an individual, right or wrongly. Like you see that when you're at the mall or something, you've got parents who are like, bending down to their toddler going, "What are you thinking? Why did you do that? What are you thinking?" And it's like, they're a toddler. They're not thinking at all. So it's hilarious in that regard. It sort of puts a mirror up to that and be like, oh, wow, it is ridiculous how we're talking to our kids sometimes, isn't it? So yeah, watch that if you can. With my 2-year-old.
I will definitely check it. I feel like I've heard of that before, but definitely now I could definitely use that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think you've been incredibly generous with your time so far, Stuart. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of talk about what's next for Brittlestar. I mean, you teased the book a little bit. I don't know if it's too early for that. I'm confident that you'll finish it on time, and that it'll be coming to us all soon. But other than that, where are we going with this phenomenon?
Wow. Phenomenon. I'm going to be coming for a hug at some point. Yeah, I mean, the book is kind of all consuming at the moment, so it's hard to sort of see past that. But of course, there's always things happening, like the podcast stuff is happening. There's lots of video stuff happening as well. And yeah, I mean, we'll sort of see. It's really weird because I've been really, really fortunate. I've been doing this for 9 years, and I haven't really been able to chart a course. I haven't been able to look ahead and say what's going to happen in a year, because it's like things could change. I think a really good example of that is starting out on Vine and getting 1.2 million followers, and then just that Vine platform closing, and it's like, well, they're just gone now. Those
Yeah.
people are just gone. So I sort of, it's kind of getting up each day and kind of making small plans and going, well, let's see how it goes. We'll see what happens next, because there's no way you can guarantee anything. So I'll just take what I get and be happy with it.
Right on. And I think when can we expect that the book, if and when it does come out?
Yeah, it'll be out next year. So 2023, it'll be out. I do have a manuscript deadline of December the 1st. It's called Welcome to the Stupid Apocalypse, a survival guide for the Dumageddon. And
It's already good.
It's a book of essays on a variety of topics, from politics to family to technology to social media to everything, and being Canadian and American and all that kind of thing. And it's been really fun, but I am reminded, as I think of the deadline, of the Douglas Adams quote of the, I love deadlines, especially the whooshing sound they make as they go past. So I'm hoping they think that's funny too. So we'll see.
Yeah. You should write that, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's great. Hey, thanks for spending a half an hour with us. We really appreciate it. It was great to unpack some of this and to talk to you and to meet you. And I'm sure our listeners will also appreciate the time you spent with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a riot. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Appreciate it. Good luck with the rest of the book.
Thanks so
We'll
much.
be waiting
guys.
for it. Well, Steve, we're back. That was a great interview with Stuart. I learned a lot of things. Again, I think I'm definitely also going to make sure to take his advice and check out that series of conversations with my 2-year-old. But beyond that, I just it was great to kind of go down. I think a lot of these touch points in Canadian cultural history that we kind of touched on today. I mean, you were able to mention Marshall McLuhan, which I think all of our history professors at Laurentian University would applaud you for, and it landed, which was great.
Yeah.
And I think the other, I love that moment where you were preparing to offer a comparison of some people that may or may not have influenced him, and there was this, like, I think this moment where we were both saying, like, he was like, I'm curious to see where this goes. But you stuck the landing, because Jonathan Pye and Rick Mercer were certainly, I think, two people that he was influenced by, and certainly
Well,
kind of.
and thank God we would have had a lot of editing to do if it didn't, right? No, but I mean, I think the more, when he started talking about how he knows about the Norm Macdonald podcast, I figured we were in the same vein, so I felt a bit more safe. But a bit of terror did wash over me for a moment, but I kept my head up.
I mean, we don't talk about the terror, but, like, I think that is for every podcast. So there's always a little bit of terror that goes into every question that you're about to ask somebody, hoping that, is this going to land? Will this be received the way that I think it is in my mind? Is my mouth going to say the words that my brain says and have this come out eloquently, or am I going to jumble through this question and just have it land flat? But again, I think you did a great job, and it was a great, he was just great with all of his answers, and I think sharing his time with us today. The one thing, I wanted to bring up in that, in the call with him, that I didn't, because I think the moment had passed, but it's funny when, he was talking about Vine and the evolution of Vine and how it kind of corresponded with the development of 4G and how you were enabled to do more of these videos on your phone. There was a period where, like, I definitely had Vine, but a good buddy of mine who we don't see that often, him and his wife, when they would come to town, we would go on YouTube and just, like, watch, like, 30-minute long, like, best of Vine compilations for that month, right? And it would drive our wives crazy because they hated those videos. But that's honestly how we spent. We would obviously crack a few beers and see where the night took us, and then it'd be like another Vine, and you would just watch 38 minutes of the best Vines of, like, March of 2014 or whatever we were watching these, right? But
Yeah, and I always wondered, like, all that earned media you got and those earned followers, like, if Twitter just goes, like, belly up tomorrow, it's not like you can leave your calling card and say, now follow me on TikTok. Like, when you lose those followers, they're gone. There's no platform anymore, right?
yeah, I mean, I feel I like it's one of those weird things where, like, most people I don't think would care, or they would think you're weird for worrying about it. But it's like, it's one of those things where, as much as, like, obviously you can't take your follower account with you, and it's not the thing that your family's going to remember or even talk about
Right,
after
right.
you pass on, but it's like, there is a lot of, like, work that goes into cultivating that audience and bringing it up. And so if Twitter crashed tomorrow, again, I certainly don't have anywhere near the follower count that Stuart does, but, like, it would be like a loss of, like, 10 years worth of work to get up to that point, right? And I mean, you would eventually just get over it and move on with your life, but it just, yeah, there's a lot of sweat equity that goes into doing that, right? I think that's underappreciated, but nevertheless, if it happens, it happens. We'll always have the podcast.
Yeah, we will, and it'll be a document that will live for time immemorial.
Live in infamy.
Yeah, another history quote. No, but it was a great episode. Always happy to have guests that understand ping pong as well. And what I mean by that is we've been very lucky to have guests that when you say something, even if you brutalize the question, they'll give it back to you at least. You know, it's not someone who just says, no, I've never thought about that. And then it sort of dies there. They understand that this is much like an improv, you should be saying yes and instead of no.
Well, I think our podcast would have been we would have had to close the doors if we didn't have the guests that were willing to do that, because I think you and I we trade in brutalizing questions week after week sometimes. But again, I think our guests elevate us all the time. I think, to Stuart's point in the conversation, I forget exactly what he said, so there's no point in me trying to reference it. But
yeah, why bring it up then, right?
That's why, like, you and I think live in the world of like dumber and happier, and our smart guests allow us to have the conversations we have and bring these to you week after week.
Well, I couldn't imagine finding dumber people to have on our podcast, so I think we'll always be punching up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I mean,
at the risk of making our audience dumber, I say we wrap this up.
I couldn't agree more. So again, thank you to Stuart, aka Brittlestar, for joining us this week. Thank you for listening and watching. We will see you next week for another episode of The Unlikely Innovators.
Take care.
Bye.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Comito and Steve Gravel, presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.